a story that we've been speaking about quite a bit on the show is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and it is sold absolutely incredibly well. Over the 26 years of this franchise, this is such a successful game for the Pokemon series, and people have been absolutely loving it. Although there have been a few bugs involved in there as well, it's still something that people have really been enjoying, and it's a breath of fresh air for the Pokemon franchise, so it's great to see it taking a little bit of a life of its own. But I'm actually joined on the show with Jordan Midland now. He's a staff writer for VGC. Hey Jordan, how are you?
I'm great, how are you?
Good, I'm not too bad, thank you, I'm not too bad. So, were you quite surprised about how well this game has done? Because it has done incredibly well sales-wise for Pokemon.
I think I was a bit surprised that it was so high up in the all-time series sales records, but the Switch is so popular now that it was almost inevitable that this release would be one of, if not the biggest in franchise history.
Absolutely, because the gameplay is a little bit different to what we're used to. I mean, it's still got the same kind of aspects, the same features, but there is a bit more of an open world feel to this game. So, were you kind of surprised at the new kind of gameplay features within the game?
I think somewhat, because they had advertised this game as the first real open world Pokemon game. I did expect a bigger kind of scope, but I also expected Pokemon to do what Pokemon does and be a bit more handholdy, a bit more accessible. But really, after about an hour of this game, you can go anywhere, you can get yourself into trouble. So yeah, it is a very different kind of Pokemon game.
Absolutely. And do you think this is maybe something that they might be going forward with? I mean, obviously, because when I think of Pokemon, the first thought I always go to is Game Boy. I don't know why, I just always go to the Game Boy version. And obviously, this is worlds apart from that. So do you think this is where they're kind of going in the direction? Because a lot of games are kind of going into that open world realm now.
I think it kind of has to be. Outside of the remakes of old games, like if they're going to remake Black and White, it would take a lot of work to change that into a huge open world game. But for the main series of games, it kind of has to be open world now. This is the right direction to go, even if the first time they've done this has had a few growing pains.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a few little glitches and bugs in there, but it hasn't seemed to stop people from wanting to play the game. I mean, sometimes though, I think a game does get released a little bit early and, when the bugs have been sort of ironed out. But I think it doesn't seem to have knocked anyone's sort of confidence in playing the game. I think it's still been, obviously, it shows it's been very popular.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing, especially because there are other games on the Switch that do big open worlds with slightly higher fidelity, and the games run a bit better than Pokemon does. But Pokemon is so big and so unique at this point that the game would have to be catastrophically broken for it to really turn people off.
I think that's it. But do you think, obviously with the Nintendo, I mean, it hasn't really taken many strides like sort of PlayStation and Xbox into the next sort of era of console. It's sort of stayed kind of static, it's upped it slightly. Do you think the bugs and things like that are testament to the platform that it's currently on and maybe it needs a bit of an upgrade?
So I think it would be unfair to completely blame the Switch. When the Switch was released, it was already outdated hardware in 2017. So there are some companies that have done amazing things, like the Xenoblade games and the Dragon Quest games are big open world games that look a lot better than Pokemon. However, the Switch is definitely showing its age at this point, and it feels like we're well overdue for the successor to the Switch.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're all very much excited. I think there has been talks about something being in the works, but it is just kind of in a little bit of a slow production pace to sort of everything else. But I mean, with the game itself, I mean, like Pokemon, because it's such an iconic franchise, do you think sometimes there's a little bit of pressure on when they bring out the next game to make it just as good as the last one or better? And do you think the franchise does have a little bit of a pressure on its shoulders?
I think it's interesting that now, because the series is approaching 30 years, there are so many different groups of Pokemon fans. There are people like me whose first games were Red and Blue right back when it started.
Yeah.
And some of them there's now over 1,000 Pokemon, and people want all 1,000 Pokemon in every game. That's not sustainable. So when they made the decision in Sword and Shield to kind of cut it off to about 400, 500 per game, that upset a lot of people. You're never going to please the entire fan base. And ultimately, Pokemon is a game that's targeted at children. So as long as that fan base is happy, can't really complain too much.
I think that's it. And I think it was quite nice because I think I read an article recently, and we spoke about it on the show yesterday, where the game, if you're sort of a pro at Pokemon, it's going to take you sort of like 30 to 40 hours. But if you're kind of new to for this particular game, it's going to take up to 60. So it's kind of nice that, it's kind of, you feel around the world. But I think it's actually bringing in some new fans. I mean, because there's some people I know that have never really played Pokemon. They played this for the first time and absolutely loved it. So it's quite nice to see it is bringing in a few new fans and maybe some more generations as well.
Yeah, it certainly seems that because they've changed to this open world formula, it's more in line with other modern games, and that will bring some people in. Also, Pokemon hype has never really been bigger. Obviously, over the pandemic, the cards got huge again.
Yeah.
The feeling around Pokemon is it's like the second golden era for it. So the first mainline game to come out in that era, it makes sense for it to be this big, and it's in the lead up to Christmas. And the Switch sold like 7 billion consoles at this point, so
That's
everyone has a
incredible.
chance to play it.
And how do you find this game sort of compares to the last game, like in terms of like, everything about it? Do you think it's kind of a bit more unique?
I think compared to Sword and Shield, it is what a lot of fans wanted when Pokemon went to consoles as opposed to handhelds. Like the idea of a big 3D open world Pokemon game has been what people have wanted for 25 years at this point. And Sword and Shield was okay, but it didn't really give that big open world feeling. It didn't feel as like um as high in terms of scope, in terms of what you can do. Whereas Scarlet and Violet, you can do whatever you want. There's a huge amount of Pokemon to go and catch. There's 3 different story paths. It doesn't feel like a traditional Pokemon game. And it's just such a shame that because of the technical shortcomings and the hilarious glitch videos that are all over Twitter, that's kind of where the conversation is about the game at the moment and not all the good things that are in it.
That's it. I mean, for you, you said as well, Red and Green was obviously the originals were your first step into Pokemon. Does it feel quite nostalgic when you kind of think back to those times when you first ever played Pokemon? What was the experience like for you when you first ever played it?
It's interesting looking back at Pokemon now and wondering how, in a kind of not pre-internet, but before I had widespread access to the internet, how you worked these things out, how all the mysteries of the games were resolved, and it was all on the playground, like hearing rumors from friends.
Yeah.
Whereas now, someone who gets Scarlet and Violet, they can just look on Google and find guides to every single little mystery. So it'd be really interesting to play that game now, if to play Scarlet and Violet, if this was your first Pokemon game, because if you've been doing it as long as me, like some things just come naturally. So yeah, it's nostalgic to look back at Red and Green, but those games are so old and so basic at this point.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even like things like Pokemon cards are coming back as well, with the nostalgia seems to just be coming back, which is great to see kids playing with Pokemon cards on the playground. I mean, love to see that. So where do you kind of see the franchise kind of taking the next steps? Do you think the next steps are going to be more of this open world sort of feeling with Pokemon? And do you think that's where they're going to go forward with the next games over the next couple of years?
So I think in the short term, the next thing will be to do some DLC for Scarlet and Violet, like they did with Sword and Shield. Because it's a big open world, you could quite easily pop another island to the left of the island and then go over there.
Yeah.
But after that, I imagine it will be time for a remake of Black and White, the Nintendo DS games.
Yes.
And then for the 10th generation of Pokemon, it is time to. By that time, if there's not a new Nintendo console, then I don't know what Nintendo are doing, because that'll be like it's usually every 3 or 4 years that we get a new generation. So
Yeah.
I expect this to be the last big Pokemon game on Switch. I thought that about Legends Arceus, and now they put out an entire new one. So
We're
who
just
knows?
checking our watch now, aren't we? Like, when's the next one?
Yeah.
When's it coming? Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us on the show and imparting your knowledge there. And it's been wicked to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.